Welcome to our broadcast today. My name is Douglas Gabriel. I'm here with John Barnwell. How are you, John?
I'm fine, Douglas, and I'm looking forward to this next part two of this particular episode. That's something that we've spent the last 40, 50 years wrestling with this unbelievably complex subject matter. So it's great to be able to give back to people, maybe help them work through it themselves.
I just wish I'd done all of these books when I was a Waldorf teacher, so I wouldn't have to keep repeating myself because, so many people, they are so interested in this stuff. I have a friend who just keeps asking me, but no matter what, doesn't matter. 100,000 times we can discuss angels. He still says, now describe an angel for me. Okay. Do you know there's 12 senses? No. Yeah. Let me tell you about the 12 senses. Now combine all those together and then throw them away and start off with all new ones that arose as a higher manifestation of the 12 senses. And you have the beginning stage of beginning to wake up in darkness in the spiritual world. Okay. I don't know any other way to describe it. So I oftentimes use the word witness because you can witness these things, and it may even, if someone later said, well, how did you get that? I said, oh, it was an intuition. Well, how did it come? Well, it could have been a vision. It could have been a sound. It could have been literally music. It could have been words. But oftentimes they're completed. Absolutely. They are absolutely thought through, whether it's an image or whether it's a sound or music, as it were, or whether it was a word. So when you communicate with the spiritual world, if you don't notice that it's not you, you're silly because it's way beyond you. People say to me, where do you get these thoughts? Well, hello, they're not my thoughts. And they weren't Rudolf Steiner's thoughts either. Okay. I mean, he was just translating it, putting it into words, but the experience is there for everyone. Now, in our first video, we talked a lot about what's in the content of this book, Cosmic Intelligence and the Spiritual Hierarchies. And there's so much in this that I'm telling you that you could make a religion out of just this book. You could literally invent a religion because the religions they don't mind mentioning the angels and archangels and the deeds and the principalities and the powers, mights, and dominions and all these things. They'll mention them in sentences. They won't tell you what they mean, or they have other names for these beings. But the reality is none of them put it together and say, for instance, in the Roman Catholic Church or even the Eastern Orthodox Church. Matter of fact, this querier that I'm speaking of is Eastern Orthodox, and he constantly says, well, this stuff shows up. Every time you mention one of these things to me, it shows up in the reading. Yeah, because it's all throughout the Bible. It's all throughout the Quran. It's all throughout the Vedas. It's everywhere, okay? Anywhere where people are having spiritual perceptions. And in the ancient times, they had a dreamlike clairvoyance. So they could experience these things. But now let's talk specifically about the fact that moral imagination, moral inspiration, moral intuition are stages that make you into an angel, an archangel, and an archai, a time spirit, if you could attain them. Most people don't attain them, as I said previously, even for a nanosecond. 1 second, 3 or 4 seconds of inspiration in a person's life could last them their entire life. And they may never have an intuition. But if you have an intuition, for instance, if you truly feel love and you know that it's a will force, it's not a feeling. Notice I even said it myself. If you feel love, in other words, if you have love flow through you and you understand it, that's an intuition. And along with it can ride all kinds of brilliant thoughts, moral imaginations, moral inspirations, moral intuitions can ride along with love. And that's what we're trying to say to you. The highest hierarchy is the seraphim. They're the beings of love. And of course, what are they doing? Reflecting what the Trinity gives them, particularly the Spirit of Christ, the being of love that pervades the entire cosmos.
Yes, in order to love, you have to go beyond this boundary of your own personal meat suit, right? So what does Christ say? He says, Wherever two or more are gathered in my name, I am in the midst of them. So that it has to do with the coming together, that you're developing your individual self, and that's important, and you'll keep that because remember, Douglas was just mentioning the clairvoyant capacities of early mankind. And but he talks about how during old moon evolution that preceded Earth evolution, that we had a dream consciousness of the astral world. But see, as we move into the future, through this little self-involved me, mine thing that we've been able to put together as an intellect, and then to purify the vehicles, when we get to the next planetary condition, we will be able to have that experience of that realm that we were in old moon, but we will be conscious. We will not be in a dream state.
Yes, let's talk about the past because we're always evolving. So even the conscience evolved. And Steiner talks about this in his lectures. He says that the Greek playwright who wrote Antigone demonstrates there that after they had done something wrong, their guilt chased them as the three Furies. Now, the three Furies were seen as winged beings, sometimes seen as female. And but it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. The matter is that they chase people. Now, why are there three of them? Because you're thinking, feeling, and willing. If you do a will that is really bad and your conscience told you beforehand, don't do it, well, then you use some thought to do it, didn't you? And use some feelings. So you might have three Furies chasing you. Or if you just have a really bad thought, you might just have one Fury chasing you, I imagine. But it doesn't matter. The point is that they were internalized in the Greek times, and they were called please correct me on this one, John, Erinis. I don't know how to say the Greek word for it.
You can say Hierarchies.
Erinis. So that's what their name was when they were no longer seen outside with the dreamy natural clairvoyance of the Greek people. They saw three beings chasing you until you resolved what it is you did wrong. And that's in this play, Antigone, as well as it's transformed in another play into this interior Furies, these Erinis. Now, Steiner points out, and John's going to love this, I'm going to spring this on him, that those beings work through your kidneys. They can tell the pressure in your blood. Now, what happens when you do something that you're embarrassed? You blush. In other words, your blood pressure changes automatically, unless you have become a sociopath or a complete deadened harmonic being and you don't have any emotions, which we're going to talk about those people in a minute. But what happens is you blush, your blood pressure changes, your heartbeat changes, right? And that's the reason a clairvoyant can look at you and they're not just seeing you, they're hearing your heart. So if they ask you a question, you lie, your heartbeat changes and you sweat more. That's kind of gross, but they know this to be true. They use it in lie detector tests. So you can just look at a person if you're clairvoyant, and if they start sweating, they're lying. If they start going like this, they're lying. You can tell all kinds of ways. So that people think they can hide it is so silly. But the point is they got these Furies around them. And every time you lie, they add to it.
They train police that if they approach a car and they ask a question, the person looks up to the left, they're lying.
It's called neuro-linguistic programming. I'm certified in it. It's also called educational kinesiology. It's one of the best ways to help children who are having difficulties reading. You know this, John. I used this when I was a teacher. So, and a principal, when the remedial teacher couldn't help, couldn't figure it out, they'd call me in and I'd say, okay. And I'd do a couple exercises with them and they'd go, why are you exercising with the children? To see if they're cross-lateral, to see if they can go from left to right, if their corpus callosum is merged. And you can tell by their willpower. Your willpower tells more than anything. Then comes your feeling. So what's the next thing I check? Before I sit them down with a pencil and pen and say, read this letter? No, I check their ears. Can they repeat a sound, an ostinata back, row, row, row your boat? Can they carry a tune? Can they read if they simply put their hand over one or the other or both ears? And you know how many times I found out that the reason a child couldn't read is because someone had hit him in the head and burst their eardrum? Very common. So hearing is a spiritual sense that it can be turned into a supersensible spiritual sense. But in a minute, I'm going to point out that you have to get rid of all of that. You have to get rid of the images. You have to get rid of the sounds. You even at the end have to get rid of the voice that you hear coming from the cosmos telling you what is the will of the divine. Because even then you still have free will. You have to dissolve those. I mentioned before the rose cross meditation. Well, the black rose, the red cross, you meditate, and then all of a sudden you say, okay, I'm done. I'm going to relax. And you go into empty state. What happens? You may hear some beautiful sounds. But the harmony of the spheres is completely misleading term. As Pythagoras said, if a building was built upon true mathematics and true form follows sound, so buildings have a sound, he said, I can strike the opposite note and the building will collapse. Well, this is the same with the entire universe. It's all built upon geometric fractal relationships, nested Julia sets, Mandelbrot sets. All these things are everywhere. And so you can see these things, but that's still not the highest level. You go to sound, and when you're hearing the planets, sometimes they're in squares, they're in oppositions. They sound horrible. They sound, like I mentioned last time, like the din of hell. And that's really the choir of the angels, the choir of the archangels, to be technical. And then you have to go beyond that. And then you have to go to just where the will of the cosmos is manifesting, the thrones, and directly from the will of the Holy Trinity. And so when you can get to the will, then it's just simply consciousness. But after that, you got to become empty again. So you even have to give up space, time, and consciousness, images, sound, and the word to go to the highest ego you have, called the cosmic I am. And when that happens, you have transcended through the 9 hierarchies, because all hierarchies are ascending. Some are descending. And that's where I want to go next. When I was a child, I would go into these realms spontaneously, probably because I'm retarded or something. I don't know why. But I'd drop to the ground and I'd hear what's called the periodicity of the elementals and the periodicity of time, the beings who rotate the earth. Okay? There are beings who their entire thing is to create the sound and the interaction with the material world of the rotation of the earth. If the rotation of the earth is actually speeding up, according to Steiner, a fraction, they now know that's true. Even a big earthquake can change the rotation of time, but those are high spiritual beings. So if you try to experience these things, they're going to overwhelm you. So what happens? You do something bad in the Greek times, the Furies chased you until you resolved it, because they didn't have much of an ego at that time. So when you did something wrong, you probably knew it. You broke some law, divine or terrestrial, and you knew it. So you're going to be chased by the Furies. But it turned internal, and it turned into the pressure of the kidneys to read the blood. And therefore, John's the one who taught me this. You look in the Bible. The word kidneys is reins, like the reins on a horse, So the heart and reins are directly connected. And Rudolf Steiner said moral technique is derived from moral imagination in the human heart, knowing what to do. And so that's a higher level than even the conscience of the kidneys that says that's the wrong thing to do. Socrates said he had a daemon, and Steiner pointed out that was the beginning of the conscience, same age, of the Greek age. And Socrates said he'd be going down a road. He'd get 2 roads he could choose from. He'd go down one or the other. If he went down the wrong road, his daemon, his conscience said, wrong road. So it didn't tell him the right road now, did it? Because why? What would that have taken? That would have taken what Thomas Aquinas called synderesis, a conscience that doesn't just tell you what's wrong and then you know what's right. but it also tells you when you're doing right. So you don't even have to do wrong. You don't have to do a hit or miss, trial or error experience here. You can get the right one from the beginning. So and that's what Tyler said when I mentioned conscience. She goes, yeah, but conscience can lead you the wrong direction. Absolutely. Now here's how that happens. So we'll talk about Sanderisa some more. How can you develop a conscience that is filled with love so that you know every time you do something and it's right, it's part of the divine plan. In other words, it's an intuition. Well, this is the big secret of cosmic consciousness. This is the big secret of the spiritual hierarchy. And that's what we put into this book. Literally, if you took this book and you digested this one book, you wouldn't need another one. And we debated whether this should be the first book that we put out, but it was too complicated because people would it'll blow your mind if you start talking about all the permutations, all the correspondences and the corollaries between the 9 hierarchy working together, because they're one being. They're just threefold and ninefold. And by the way, they're part of a 12. And by the way, they manifest through 3 with the human being, and sometimes 5 and 7 and 10. So you have to look at this, as I often say, it's simple. Well, parts of it are simple, but as Rudolf Steiner likes to say, it's so complex people won't even attempt to think it because it's just too complex. Well, you know when something is right or wrong because what? If you've been a moral person and you hear somebody on the internet talking this or that, if you listen with your heart and your kidneys will tell you if it's wrong. That's part of discernment. But will it tell you if it's right? No, you have to have freedom. And that's called synderesis. And so moral imagination, moral inspiration, moral intuition leads to conscience. Conscience leads to synderesa. Synderesa is always filled with love. So you could literally say that after the 3 stages of moral imagination, inspiration, intuition, you come to conscience and you come to love. Well, where's love? Love is the seraphim. Where is conscience? What is right or wrong? Well, that comes out of wisdom, doesn't it? That's the Kyrieutetes. So when John mentioned truth, it's also the same thing as wisdom. And what did the Greeks believe in? Well, they believed in all kinds of gods and goddesses, and many of the goddesses were threefold, by the way. What did they really believe in? If you ask the common Greek person, they believed in truth, beauty, and goodness. And what is that? That is a mixture of the higher hierarchies. Literally, that's their names. Aristotle gave them the name quantity, quality, relation, space, time, position, activity, suffering, being. But that's how you look at it in the material world. In the world of virtues, in the world that you're building your mansion in heaven, you need to speak in the language of the spirit, and use the alphabet of the cosmos, which is the hierarchy. The hierarchy, you can analyze everything in the cosmos through the 9 hierarchy being manifested by the Trinity. And then that happens in you, in your bodies. You have 9 bodies, actually. And so these are, they're not just correspondences. These aren't just occult correspondences in a chart. These are the realities. But to come to the realities, you can't actually think it. You have to go into moral imagination before you can even begin to think what these hierarchies do. But sometimes they do act in your feeling through an inspiration. Sometimes they do act in your intuition. Why does that happen? Because you're morally ripe for it. When you are morally ripe, matter of fact, Steiner says, it's a great quote. I wish I had the exact quote. He says that in your being, he specifically says the archangels come in and chew on you. And they get the good that you've done. It's like they're tasting the nectar from a flower. Angels, same thing with your thinking. An angel gets so excited when you have a moral thought, and they tell their buddies. And pretty soon, if you're having a bunch of moral thoughts in a row, you have a conclave of angels. And Steiner gives this exercise for Waldorf teachers. That's what we do in our meetings. We try to go to the threshold of consciousness and invite hierarchical beings to incarnate. And he says, behind you stands your guardian angel, putting his hand upon your head. And he gives you the courage that you need. And then the archangels give you something, and the archai give you something. And in the end, a drop of love comes in between everyone in that conversation. And they know, literally, if they were awake, that that is the archangel Michael creating a drop of love from Christ. And a clairvoyant can see these things. And literally, we did meditations for decades as Waldorf teachers on these things so that we could see them. We'd also do the calendar of the soul as a way to see the spirit behind nature. Nature will put you to sleep. When you're in the summer, you think you're awake. You're totally dead asleep. When you're in the winter, you think you're sleeping. No, you're totally, completely awake. It's the opposite. But once you understand these things, then you can say, aha, my kidney is telling me something by the pressure on my blood. I'm going to relieve the being who does that for me, and I'm going to understand that language of the conscience and say, thank you very much. You're right. That person is lying to me. And then I'm going to say, now, how can I help that person? And I'm going to go to the level of the heart, and I'm going to look for a moral technique. I'm going to look for sandaresis, a higher form of conscience, God on earth. And you become active as the willpower, the activity, the suffering and being of the spiritual hierarchy and the Holy Trinity through taking a conscious act of love. If you can take a free, anxious, conscious act of love, you've invited the hierarchy.
Yes, the understanding of how one passes through the Grail initiation, you go back to Wolfram von Eschenbach again, our friend on the horse. And he talks about how on the path of the Grail, you pass from tumphite, which is like dullness or doubt. And that's in the realm of the kidneys. So when you pass from the realm of tumphite or dullness, you move into the realm of salda. That's blessedness. That's the heart. See, if you go into the Old Testament, you see numerous instances where they say he was pierced in his kidneys, and they have this word husaba. It's like your kidneys like getting on you about something, so that it's that the balance in the kidneys. The parent organs have a special place. So you have the kidneys, you have the lungs, you have the ears, and that there is a dynamic relationship in the eyes, so that this whole understanding of the weighing, it's like in the papyrus of Ani from ancient Egypt, where they're weighing the heart against the feather of Ma'at, the vulture goddess of truth. Is like, to what extent has this heart, has this individual, this ib, they called it, has it participated in truth? Because it becomes weighted down when it departs from that path of truth. See? And so that's that vulture goddess Ma'at. What does the vulture do? They handle the cast aside, the carrion, right? So they're like giving you an image that it has to do with the after death state and all the unredeemed astrality that you're going to leave behind. And again, speaking to what I was saying earlier, that when one transforms the astral into spirit self through moral inspiration, then you're enabled to go through that after death state and pass that right up. You don't even have to go through Kamaloka. And in fact, you'll find initiates like Rudolf Steiner, for example, he only slept 4 hours a night, because he didn't have to go through all this intermediate clearinghouse stuff. He could actually go right into the deeper states of being. So these are very real things. And of course, people that dwell within the realm of Dummheit, of dullness and doubt, they probably think we're crazy. Well, great, because they're cast in the movie too. That there's the people out there that don't get it, and that's okay. They're free to do that. Maybe in their next life, they'll have a change of heart, because that's what happens, is that you have a change of heart. You get to the point to where you enliven the heart with this forces, and the heart force is a force of warmth, and you take that warmth and you begin to, when you speak this truth, you imbue it with that love, that connectedness, that's that warmth. And so you have this whole idea of the transformation of thinking through the forces of warmth that Rudolf Steiner talks about. And then you have the alternation. He says that when you become fearful, that the blood goes towards the heart, and so you get a cold. They say you get a cold chill, right? And the opposite, when you get angry, that makes my blood boil. That the blood is going out to the surface. And so there's that polarity happening there. That's a dynamic example that one can experience in one's own life. He says, but the place to where one should dwell is to be able to find the median point between those two. That's that quiescence. Because remember, as it says in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, it says meditation is the cessation of the modifications of the mind. And so if you go back to that Lao Tzu quote, that a pot derives its value from what's there and its usefulness from what is not, that's that Grail concept of that you have to create a space. It's like creating a space for a guest so that Christ can come into your life.
So true. With Rudolf Steiner's teaching, some say, and he says in the first class specifically, that it's a new mystery center. In the ancient times, if you were moral and you'd done your preparation, you might be invited into the mystery centers and they would teach you some of these things. But it's not the primrose path. It is not a walk in the park. If you think for one second that Rudolf Steiner being able to access the Akashic Chronicle was something easy to do, then you need to study his life closer, because you'll find out that he was in a great amount of suffering. As a matter of fact, these people who can see into the spiritual world, as I said before, first they experience hell, and they have to work through their own hell, the hell that they have created for themselves. And then you can enter across the threshold. And when you come to the abyss and you're showing your negative sides, because you can advance thinking, feeling, and willing up or down. If you advance it up, it comes moral, imagination, inspiration, and intuition. If thinking, feeling, and willing goes down, they become the 7 deadly sins. Now, if you get to the abyss and you can go across because you are morally developed, then you literally sprout wings and you fly to the other side. And when you turn around, you have to give up everything from the sense world. This is the same thing that happens when you meet an angel. It's the same thing as initiation. It's the same thing as going to sleep. It's the same thing as when you die. You're going to face the darkness. And if you don't have internal light, you're going to be in a dark realm for a while. And if you haven't built a structure for yourself across the abyss, as they call it the hut sometimes. Christ call it there are rooms in the mansion. There's houses. There's temples. You can describe it any way you want. If you're really magnificent and full of Luciferism, you might describe it as the great golden temple with golden pearly doors and the 7 pillars of virtue, and the starry sky is on the dome of that's all well and good. But here's what really happens. Once you get over there, you're going to find out that you're going to be tempted. And the temptation comes from 2 directions. one from Lucifer and Luciferic beings who tempt you with the light. And when I was a child, every time I'd fall to the ground and eventually understand what I was listening to, I'd say, don't you dare send me back to the physical world. That is such a horrible thing to do to me. After I've experienced this, why would you do that to me? I would become actually very, very upset after these experiences. It'd take me days to recover from them, because after you have an experience of witnessing the divine, you don't want to leave many times, especially when you're a young child like I was. Well, the same thing will happen for people who start to see auras in the astral body. They start to see some colors, and Lucifer tells them, oh my, you're now a spiritual healer. That's one of 3 levels. And Lucifer is going to tempt you, and Lucifer is going to make you want to leave your body and stay out in the realm of light. But his light is cold light. That's how you know the difference. If an angel comes to you and entreats you to cross the threshold, if you feel cold, don't go. It's real simple. If you feel warmth, yes. Now, but there's even a bigger problem, okay? That's easy to do because, in fact, in the end, at the beginning, Lucifer brought us our dreamy clairvoyance that turned into our intellect. But now we must do this with intellectual clairvoyance. We must be awake. We must understand through objective viewing of our own thinking, or thinking about thinking, that you're engaging beings, not just forces, not just forms, not just light and sound and words. No, you're engaging beings, and you need to learn how to let that being go through you and to let yourself become a vessel for that being. And so as a child, when this would happen, I'd become very upset, and I couldn't understand when I was really young why other people weren't seeing these things. I'd point to a group of angels going by just a few feet above us. No one, they'd look at me like, you're nuts. They thought I was nuts. And then, I didn't want to talk, because when I talk, like when they take me to the psychologist or psychiatrist, I'd say, well, these beings speak to me. Oh boy, you know what they do to you then? When you start saying that the beings are speaking to you, talking to you about the angels in heaven, and about the instruments that the angels are playing, and about, their geometric dynamic relationship and the dance of the harmony of the sphere, they lock you up. Okay. So I learned from an early age not to talk about these things. But when you see other people have these experiences, it is extremely common in the initial stages of it to get tempted by Lucifer. And as we mentioned before, there's Luciferic and Ahrimanic temptations that cause falls in the hierarchy at all levels, basically, if you have the very, very big picture. And so as a human being, you are drawn into the spiritual world, and they're going to, the beings of Luciferic beings are going to show you all kinds of beautiful images and visual things that you may have never experienced before, and you'll say, well, that's not me. So Doug said, if it wasn't me, it's an angel. Yeah, but Doug also said they could be Luciferic angels. So be careful of this. And so you see this all the time with spiritual leaders, and especially in the old traditions that no longer have relevance in our age. They believe because they can contact Lucifer and they can create certain strange manifestations about light and color and so on and so forth, that they are lucid, that they're God. This is the egotism that too early thinks that because of the Luciferic temptation, you're God. Okay? Then on the other hand, there's the Ahrimanic temptation. And as John said, if you're cold, there's a reason for being cold. If your blood's cold, well, then you're a lizard, aren't you? You're a reptilian. You're not a human. You're certainly not in your heart with Christ. So you can get cold, and Ahriman will draw you into the subnature world. There's supernatural world. And yes, Lucifer lives in that world. He'll tempt you. And there's a subnatural world. And yes, Ahriman and the Ahrimanic beings and the Asuras and Sorat will try to pull you into the subnatural realms, even into the realm of the 8th sphere. So that's about evil. But evil is there so that you can run up against it. It's like a mountain. Why did God create mountains? So you can climb them. You get to the summit. What do you have? You have a very amazing experience of looking out upon the world, which tells you something about yourself, because your self comes from the outside world in the first stages. So you get these temptations, and that's what you have to be careful of. If it's cold and it's telling you you're all that and you're God, like all these people who lead these cults, these death cults, listen to their voice, zero warmth. And many times they'll have incredible luciferic light coming out of them. And what's that? That's excarnation without Christ. And the incarnation without Christ becomes these dark beings. So there is, as John pointed out, a battle between light and warmth. And the negative beings want to steal your human warmth. Because why? Your I am is fire. What's everything out in the universe? It's fire, warmth, or the lack of it. And so when you're talking about the beings who want to steal part of you, they're trying to steal your warmth. Just touch your computer, feel how warm it gets as you're working on it. Now, it's cold, parts of it that are moving, the fan may get warm. But in terms of coldness, when you're going into the virtual world, this is the world of Ahriman, totally cold. So literally, folks, a supersensible organ for warmth in your heart helps you determine what goes from being your conscience telling you what's wrong to the synderesis telling you what's right. And the way you'll know is it will be warm and it will be filled with love.
Yes, there's that experience of the arising of warmth that happens when one enters into this state of moral inspiration, which is the moral imagination takes place at the 2-petal lotus of the brow, in the 16-petal lotus of the throat. That's the moral inspiration, and then moral intuition takes place within the 12-petal lotus of the heart chakra. So when you look at that and you say, well, that's very interesting, and if you do studies in physiology of the heart and so forth, you know that Rudolf Steiner has commented on it, that the heart responds to all the stimuli that you're going through on a level that you're not even aware of. That if a new person comes in the room, it affects the way your heart beats, the way your blood flows. So it's connected to the universe at large, whereas your puny little personalities, just like a bubble floating on the surface of this cosmic nature that's actually you, right? But people have a difficult time with this whole idea of the brow chakra, the third eye, and all of that. And Rudolf Steiner says, and I've repeated this because it's important, but I've repeated this on a few occasions, the reason people have difficulty in entering really into the realm of moral imagination and having the experience of the Christ light is that you are that light. So it's hard to
Absolutely.
see it because you are that. That's what you are. But you see, you think you're the shadow that's cast by that great light on the wall, like in Plato, or as they would have said back to Plato. Back in the heyday, Plato's talking about you're seeing your image from that the fire casts of you on the wall of the cave, and likewise with when I in the previous episode I was talking about the presence of the angels and archangels and archai in the physical world. It's they reflect into the physical world. So the angels reflect into the realm of the water and the clouds and all that. And the archangels in the realm of fire as spirits of fire. And then the archai, that they are entering into this realm within that realm in the lightning strike, in that warmth of the fire, so that you have this whole dynamic image, but you have to understand it's all done with mirrors.
You just brought up an image for me. Lightning is in your willpower, which we know is true. which we described in the last video. I mean, it's the cherubim that are trying to create balance and harmony in the clouds above us, which give us all of our weather, which gives us all of our life. And then in the heart is the rainbow, because it's really not there. It's a matter of perspective. And if you can take that rainbow and you look at it one way, if you are on an airplane and you look at a rainbow, what do you see? It's a full circle. So if you can see the full circle of the rainbow, and you can see it also as a dish, as a grail, it is a vessel ready to catch the light that gets transformed through you into the colors. And the colors represent everything in the world. And then when you go to the head, you see the aurora borealis. And literally, as a clairvoyant, I can tell you, that's the reason I've been obsessed with the aurora borealis all my life. I'd look at people and say, wow, really spiritual people? Not only do they have angels flying in and out of them, oftentimes there were people, saying mass in those days. The priests, some of them were still holy, or other holy people I've seen. You look into their third eye, and what do you see? The aurora borealis. And what do the Tibetans say, right? Coming out of your third eye is the rainbow. And so, it's the night rainbow, the aurora borealis. But the point is that in your head is a lot is going on. So you can see these examples of thinking is aurora borealis, which is actually thinking, feeling, and willing, but just as an image. The rainbow in the heart and lightning in the willpower, well, these are all light. And they're light in relationship to other things. Lightning is light that just happens to show us the balance that needs to take place between simply hot and cold interacting in our atmosphere. At one lightning bolt, if you could for 1 second understand the power of one lightning bolt, you'd probably just spontaneously combust. You wouldn't be able to handle it. And then when you realize there's 100,000 lightning bolts every day strikes the equatorial zones, and that lightning happens all the time, and that as Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor, was sitting as a child next to his sister, you told me this, and I had forgotten it because I'd done a lot of work on Thomas Aquinas, his biography. Yeah, lightning struck his sister, and he felt that he should really go to the church now and work with the church, because lightning struck his sister, didn't strike him. So, what was that saying? And ball lightning, I was just looking at some beautiful film of ball lightning. They'll tell you it doesn't exist. It does. And what is that? Those are beings working through forces that create a form that is only there for a minute, just like rainbow's only there for a minute. Lightning's only there for a second. Aurora borealis is only there for a short while. And then all of them interactions with the sun. Don't forget, all light in the earth comes from the sun. All interactions that create everything we see here manifested comes from the sun and other stars. I throw that in because it is true. Elements over long periods of time do come from other stars and have come down here, and we work with them. And so what you have is manifestation of light, but really what you want to work on, because light is first stage. You want to go to sound. What is sound? Sound is what Steiner calls the chemical ether, the forming ether. He calls it the number ether, the valence ether. It's everything. It's how every atom relates to another atom, how every human relates to another human. The only thing I've learned about human love is that it's all chemistry, right? And that's what the chemical ether is. It's all chemistry. And it either works, could explode, or it could turn into a whole new substance, or it could do nothing. That's what happens with chemistry, right? So that's the chemical ether. But when you get to and that's in your inspiration, when it gets to the will, that's the word of Christ. That's the word of God manifesting as Christ through you, your I am, which is the intent of all of this creation, is to create out of nothingness more I am beings that become Christian beings that become literally cosmic I ams that then start the creation process all over again. So when you look at the heart, Rudolf Steiner says, you have the universe turned inside out. And if you could turn the heart inside out, it would become the universe. And he means the cosmos, the universe, everything. There's an end. And what's on the other side of the end? Who knows? We can't even understand what's happening in our solar system, according to Rudolf Steiner. Our little brains like to think, for instance, and they still propagate these scientific myths, which really are the new Ahrimanic religion of evil, that light only moves at a certain speed. No, that's totally incorrect. They know that. Have they corrected the books? No. Have they? What is gravity? They now no, gravity didn't exist, and they just found out that dark matter doesn't exist, that dark space doesn't, and that the space isn't cold. Everything that humans think they know from the Earth is wrong the second it gets even close to leaving our atmosphere. Okay, we have no clue what's going on in the solar system. They're now only finding out the true motion of the planets and the sun, and we must remember that Christ from the Trinity came down to the Elohim, the second rank of the hierarchies, and manifested through what's called the spirits of form, the Elohim, one of which was called Jehovah at a point. But Christ, through the seven major Elohim, controlled the seven planets. And those are our seven organs. They're the seven chambers in our heart. They're the seven chambers in our head. Everything is a fractal of the original template of the I am that Christ created for us on the sun. Eventually, the earth will reunite with the sun. And when we do, we will reunite with our higher I am, which has been waiting for us all along, which then throws in a lot of temporal problems, problems of heterochrony, problems of, for instance, when you go into the spiritual world, you're going to fear the future coming at you. It will seem as if it is going to overwhelm you and there's nothing in you. It's going to extinguish your I am. That's what you experience when you're a true initiate, going into intuition. But also, you can go into the past and through the Akashic records, see all the images imprinted into what's called the 0 point, or the point of Akasha, the Akashic Chronicle, Akashic records, many different names for it. And these things are real for clairvoyance. But guess what? You have to suffer more than you can ever imagine to go into these realms. You have to suffer the pain of every person on the earth, essentially, when it comes down to it. And that will overwhelm your small I am. So who is it that's going to survive through going through these realms as you go up the ranks of the hierarchies? That would be the I am that's still on the sun, the I am that is a Christened part of your higher egos.
As Rudolf Steiner said, wisdom is the fruit of suffering. So it's not for the faint of heart, mind you. And actually, in many of the ancient mysteries, you had to go through life-threatening challenges to be able to be admitted into the precincts where the higher mysteries would take place. So this is a very real thing, whether it be in Paderborn, Germany, at the Extern Stones, doing a balancing act on a rope between two rocks where if you fall, you die.
I've been there. It's true.
Seriously, now it's like a cable car station or whatever, train station underneath it. But so these things are very, very real, and but they can be entered into in a wholesome way, because the simple key is this, and it goes back to the beginning of the previous show. Whom does the Grail serve? It's that whole idea, and that's the challenge that Parsifal meets when he enters into the Grail castle. And because he was instructed not to ask too many questions, and he walks into the Grail castle and he finds the wounded king, that he doesn't ask him, brother, what ails you? And because he doesn't do that, it all disappears, and he ends up spending the next 40 years wandering through the wasteland. And so that dilemma is really the wasteland. That's the dilemma of the consciousness soul, isn't it? And in fact, you could read The Wasteland by T.S. Lewis.
T.S. Eliot.
T.S. Eliot, excuse me. They were friends, but yes, T.S. Eliot's Wasteland and his quartet. I mean, you see a wonderful expression of the struggle of the consciousness soul. And he was very aware of Rudolf Steiner. He was a part of that circle of the Inklings. Douglas is working on another volume. regarding the inkling. So these things are out there, they're available. And the more you use it in your effort to help other people, the more you'll personally gain from it yourself, because it's about the other. That's important to understand, that love is the most uh, it's like the most social state of being that you can experience.
And as you always like to point out, Percival goes to the castle. He doesn't ask the question, and then he leaves. And then what does he experience? Suffering, suffering, more suffering. How about some more suffering? How about the suffering of his beloved, the suffering of people who died for him, the suffering, and then some more suffering. And then finally, after he finally wakes up to who the people in his environment were, he realizes he's got a brother who's black and white and comes from the East. And what's his name? Feraphus. And without Feraphus, he doesn't become the Grail King. And by the way, he's not the one who gets the maiden who's called the bringer of joy, the one who carries the Grail. Feraphus marries her. He still has to work on more suffering, basically, and then finally he becomes the king. But the point is, you don't get there by yourself. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they call it the Mahayana and the Hinayana boat, or the big boat and the little boat. The little boat is when you go off to become a monk, study all your life so that you can reach these stages we've talked about. And what good does it do you? It gets you to taking the first step in your next incarnation. You cannot get to heaven. You cannot reach enlightenment even. And you certainly can't reach intuition, initiation, full initiation, being a monk or going away from the world and just meditating and working on what you see happening in you. It is what you do with others. It's what they call a householder. It's a person who takes on the commitment of other people. And the only way to reach enlightenment, according to the highest Yoga Tantra of Vajrayogini, is first you study, morality training. You study Mantrayana, Hinayana, Vajrayana, Tantrayana. So you have to go through these stages. And as you do, you have to love another. You can't do it on your own. It is impossible. You will not reach enlightenment, and you certainly won't reach liberation unless you love everyone. Rudolf Steiner says the initiate does not sleep at night for knowing of the suffering of the world. And that is true, because once you reach a certain level and you can communicate with angels, they're going to help. What they do is, they don't sleep at night, right? Angels don't sleep. You do. Well, guess what? You don't get to sleep at night when you're an initiate because you're too busy helping the angels help everybody else, because the help is needed right now more than ever. And so you do what Daskal is called exomatosis, I think it's called. In other words, you travel on the astral plane, the angel plane, at night when you sleep. If you have gotten across the abyss because you're moral, you've developed your imagination, inspiration, intuition. You've developed your conscience. You developed your synderesis. You've developed love, and then you will be used. And if you think at that point, there is nothing except being a householder, getting married, staying true to one person, and having children, that's the highest thing you can do on the earth, because that builds future Jupiter. It builds the world that we will live in, that we call heaven when we become angels. And so we're building that right now. Some people are building it in the realm of the eighth sphere in darkness, and others are building it in the realm of light, filled with warmth for the future. So when I look at a picture of me and my 4 children that was taken of me many years ago by my wife, and I'm holding all 4 of them, and we're all 4 loving each other and closing our eyes, and we're all in ecstasy loving each other, and we're all holding each other. That's it, folks. That's it. If you didn't learn that while you're on the earth, you're not in the Mahayana boat. If you don't have friends you can stand around and hug, if you don't love the people in your life, then forget about spiritual development, okay? It's real simple. You just have to follow the one rule Christ gave us: love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. Again, a threefold challenge that is difficult, because first you have to love yourself, then love your neighbor, then you can love God. And what we're saying here is that the path of the hierarchies and the help of the hierarchies, and this is maybe the most important point I make today, The angels, the archangels, all of them, all the angelic hosts are there to help you combat Lucifer, Ahriman, and the Asuras and get you through so you stay on the path, the divine path, at the right speed. If you go too fast, like an initiate goes very fast, they have to suffer a lot more. If you go too slow, you fall into darkness. So the whole point is simply to learn the language of the spirit and learn to see them, hear them, and feel them in your heart in a way that requires no senses, no sense-bound thinking, no sense-bound senses at all. This is a new form of perception. And the only thing I can say is I call it witnessing. Because when you see these things, you know they're not in the physical world per se. They're in a different world that permeates this world. And when you see, like the golden rose, I saw, Joe, nice golden rose. What is that? What is the realm that is happening? Well, when you get with spiritual people, there's an ether, the warmth, light, sound, and life ether that goes in between them is actually a continuous. It's like you're in the same swimming pool or something. You're in the same atmosphere and you are experiencing all of that. But if you think it's you, then Lucifer's tempting you. And if you want to keep it and you think that you're better than somebody else, you're a god of these things, then Ahriman has you.
Yeah, the quote of you, I'm creating this rose in the astral light and opening up its petals, and you come and sit down. You said, "Oh, a golden rose. How cool." It still cracks me up every time I think about it. Because I realized that you saw what I saw, just like the experiences that you and I have both had with David Spangler. I mean, I had this little elemental being that my cat used to chase him around, and when he'd catch him, he'd look, and there wouldn't be anything there, and he'd freak out. But this little puppet face guy, and I was talking to David Spangler, and he stood right right in front of me, in between David and I, and David looks down at it, and he brushes it aside, and you could see it streaming fly away, and I realized, oh, he could see it too. And so there are levels at which, when you start to realize the objective nature of these things, that they're not hallucinations, right? Because a hallucination is subjective. You're seeing it by yourself. When you have a true imagination like that, then what's happening is something that can be shared with others. And so when you encounter, like, for example, the method that Douglas mentioned that's so wholesome and helpful is the imagining the black cross surrounded by 7 red roses. That's empowered because that was given by Christian Rosenkreuz. And Christian Rosenkreuz, back in the era of Marie Antoinette, he said time is accelerating. In his incarnation as the Comte de Saint-Germain, he said time is accelerating. And so we know that time is accelerating. And actually, since the middle of Atlantis, time has been accelerating. And so we might want to make a move on it.
Well, heaven and hell have opened. The gates are open. And Rudolf Steiner says superhuman beings are coming to us from Mercury, Venus, and Vulcan. And these are beings that no one quite understands, but let's just say they're there to help us. The whole hierarchy is there to help us. And when we realize that in our body, we have the angelic visions, the angelic illuminations that run through our thoughts when we actually have true moral thoughts, moral imagination, that is happening in our body. That's the light that's in our body. And when we realize that our heart is beating at the same frequency as the entire universe, and that's what they will eventually figure out, and that nothing can stop that, and that everyone on that frequency is all connected, no matter where you are in the cosmos, that's in your heart. And when you realize that the fire of the higher hierarchy is in your willpower, that you have the cosmic fire of the universe, the fire of love in your willpower, which most of us do not realize. We have the power of the hierarchy, the power of gods in us. We have the power of God. So these things are manifesting in us, and all we have to really do is accept them with humility after great moral development and preparing ourselves and renunciation and even asceticism if you need to get rid of the dragon in your lower chakras and realize that you have the Archangel Michael on your side, who is the countenance of Christ, who can defeat the dragon and lead you to the true warmth and light of the Spirit.
And as Rudolf Steiner said, Christ is infinitely more powerful than the adversaries.